A good evening to all of you, and I hope all of you are safe and secure. Just a minute. I hope all of you are safe and secure in your homes. I understand most of the subscriber, or as you like to call them, followers, are the ones who are students or those who are fresh into law graduate. I'll be speaking on a subject which I find it interesting, but I understand this is something which is not really taught in law schools. So I'll go on very basic and in a storytelling manner, which I'll give you illustrations. If you find any difficulty in the same, you can ask me questions later, but let me tell you what it is all about. We'll be talking about just we'd be talking about law relating to wills, and this discussion would broadly be divided in 4 parts, and I will be dealing with each of them at one after another. In the first part, I'll be explaining what are the essentials of a will. The second part, I'll be dealing with what is the law relating to first part, essentials of will. Second part, I'll be dealing with what are the law relating to execution of unprivileged will. Third part would be proof of will, and fourth would be suspicious circumstances around the will. When can it be said that a will is suffering from suspicious circumstance? Coming to the first part, the essentials of will. Will, as you know, is a document by which a person expresses one's desire in a manner by which his property will devolve upon the people living after him. It is therefore necessary that what is stated in the will should describe the clear intention of the testator. It should be very, very clear that what did he want to say and what was his desire. So the intention is of a paramount consideration. The will as a document comes into effect after the death of a person, which would mean that the person who is making the will is no longer available when the document has to be enforced or implemented. And the last is, just a minute, one more attempt. The last is when we talk about the last two is when what is the responsibility of a court in dealing with the wills, and what is the difference between privileged and unprivileged will. I'm glad that you are back. I'll quickly recapitulate in saying what I was saying very quickly this time. We are going to discuss about the will. The discussion is going to be in 4 parts. The first part is an essentials of will. The second part is about execution of unprivileged will. Third part is the proof of will, and the last part is the suspicious circumstance. When we talk about execution of will, one must understand first and foremost what is the meaning of a will. Will is the declaration of the person about in regard to his property, how he wants the property to go after his death. So it is a document which comes into effect after the death of person. In another manner, we can say a person can change his will any number of times he wishes to, as long as he is alive, because every time the will comes into effect only after the death of a person. In making of a will, the most important part is it must reflect the intention of the testator. It must categorically state what is the what was he intending, and it must be very, very evident from the document which come in there. Courts also have a great responsibility in regard to the wills. We will discuss the responsibilities of the court. And lastly, I would say that there is something known as privileged and unprivileged will. This is something interesting which I'd like to share with you. Privileged wills are those wills which are executed by persons who work in armed forces and who are in state of war or actual expedition. The rules pertaining to execution of will by these people is different than the rules pertaining to unprivileged will, because they are in special circumstances and they are not required to follow the strict rules which we will be discussing. Every other will which is not made by a soldier in action is called an unprivileged will. A will which you and I would make would definitely be an unprivileged will, and it would not be a privileged will. Let me come to the next part, which is what is the requirement, of a valid will. I am sorry because of this connection. Let me ask: can you hear me? Am I audible enough? Because now we are getting into a serious discussion part. Please respond. Am I audible? Okay, good enough. I get one. I am audible. As I stated, another difference between a privileged and unprivileged will is privileged will could be oral. Also, it can be in writing, but it could be oral also. But an unprivileged will, as I say, is the will which you and I would make, necessarily has to be in writing. Oral wills are not permitted amongst Hindus, Jain, Buddhists, Christians, except Muslims. A will must bear the sign of the testator or his mark, or it must be acknowledged. When I say these three words, each of them has a different connotation and meaning. Sign means, as we conventionally understand, sign means it must be signed by the person in a usual manner. When we say mark, it is the thumb impression of the person when he puts it. There are illustrations where the person who makes a will, as we call them a testator in case of a male and testatrix in case of a female, they put a thumb mark on a document. Illiterate persons would put a thumb mark, that is known as a mark. And the third condition is an acknowledgement of signature. The signature may already be there. The testator may say, well, this is my signature. He need not sign in presence of the witness, but he may say, this is my signature. Please accept it as my signature. There may, however, also be cases where the testator may ask someone else to sign on his behalf. There may be conditions like medically if a person is unfit, his hands are that he cannot sign or put his thumb mark, his hand may be bandaged or anything of that kind. In that case, he may authorize anyone else to sign his will on behalf of the testator. So when we talk of signature or sign, it requires two conditions, as in it requires who can sign it, or two kind of people can sign it. Testator himself can sign it, or any person authorized by him can be sign it. It could be signature, it could be thumb impression, or it could be an acknowledgement of signature. We move from here to the next condition, which is the intention of the testator. When a testator signs a document, this testator must definitely sign with the intention to sign it as a document of will. You'd recall we discussed a little while ago that the intention of the testator is very important. So, intention that when he signs a document, I am repeating, he must sign with an intention that he is signing the document as a will. He must know it as a will. it may not be a situation where it may not be a situation where there is a document which is bears his signature, but it may not contain his intention. Let me put it another way. It's not that every document which bears the signature of a testator would bear his intention. Let me give you an example here. This is an illustration, and when I say these are illustrations, believe me, these are illustrations which are drawn out of case law. 1. The testatrix, or the testator in this case, was a regular litigator. Litigator is one who was facing litigation regularly. In the process of his litigation, he used to sign on blank papers and leave it with his lawyers. When you would be joining profession, or those who have recently joined the profession, you would come across a situation जब आप blank documents लेके रख लेते हैं signature करके, so that the application is not ready, let's take it on last page and we'll fill it later. So by evidence it became very evident that he used to leave these blank signatures with the testator, with his lawyer. After the death of this gentleman, a will is set up. The scribe of the will, when I say scribe, it means the person who's the author of the will, who drafts the will for you. Draftsman, scribe, a lawyer. A will is set up. The draftsman or a scribe was the same very lawyer who used to be his lawyer in court and who used to represent him in court. The matter and the will was made in favor of few of his relative, and some of them were disinherited. So those who were disinherited, they challenged the testimony, the will, by saying that look, this did not bear the intention of the testator. Now keep reminded that we are talking of intention of the testator. So the people said that this was not the intention of the testator and his blank signatures have been abused. The court, looking at the circumstances and evidence, came to a finding that yes, this is a case where a signature on a blank paper has been abused, and therefore it cannot be considered to be a will, as it fails in an important criteria of the will, which is that it did not bear the intention of the testator. The second illustration which I would give is, I don't know whether you have had the occasion to look at typed wills, or there was a time when there were typewriters. Before the computers, typewriters were being used for filing. Typewriters were used for filing, typing. In this particular matter, the document was typed on a single page. The first 8 lines or 10 lines were typed in double spacing, and last few lines was typed in single spacing, which ended just above the signature of the testator. And right beneath the signature of the testator, in a very, very small gap, there were signatures of the attesting witnesses. So the question was, these are the question which arose was that where was the need of the testator to go in for a typing of a will which was not signed, which had double spacing and a single spacing. So court ultimately came to a finding that the fact that the single spacing has been put at the end and the double spacing has been put at the top clearly makes it evident that the signatures of the testator were already existent on a document, and that document has been converted into a will, and therefore the court did not consider it as a regular validly executed will. So these are two illustrations which I gave you on the intention of the testator. Now, having said that there are attesting witnesses and etc., so the next condition which I would like to point out is, in regard to execution of will, is that it must be attested by at least 2 witnesses. Mind you, this is one of the most important criteria, that a will must have at least 2 attesting witnesses. If there are less than 2 witnesses or there are no witnesses, then it cannot be considered to be a valid and legal will. Now, when it comes to the will, what is the test if we look at what is the test in proof of a will, intention, testator signing with their intention. Now comes the attesting witnesses. The test under the provision applicable to law is section 63 Succession Act. The test available is that the testator must sign in presence of the attesting witness. So what is needed is an ocular view. The attesting witnesses must see the testator sign the document, and when the attesting witnesses attest the will, the testator must see it. The basic rule is they must see each other while executing a document. It is a very simple thing to do, but in many of these cases this simple rule is not followed, which results in throwing the will out of the court. People take this exercise very, very casually. I'll give you an example of a case which was decided by Delhi High Court. In this case, the testator of a will was a very learned man. He was a bar at law, member of a constituent assembly, in India's ambassador to a country, member of Rajya Sabha, and most importantly, he was a ruler of an erstwhile princely state in Rajasthan. He got his will drafted by a senior advocate. The will was attested by two witnesses. One of the witness was a chartered accountant, and who happened to be the director of Reserve Bank of at that point of time. Mind you, now look at the status of a person. The testator is a former Raja. The attesting witness is a chartered accountant and a member of Reserve Bank of India. And the second attesting witness was the junior of a senior advocate who drafted the will. This guy barely had a year of experience. The will was executed at the residence of the Raja. When this witness came to the witness box, when this young lawyer came to the witness box, he stated, the testator or the Raja Sahab did not sign in my presence. Is the voice better now? I hear get that there is the voice better, Vicky Malik? Vicky? The Raja, what he deposed in court was, this young lawyer deposed in court, when the testator signed, I was not present there. He was sitting in his bedroom, and the other attesting witness was there. I was sitting outside in the drawing room. When the will came to me, it already had the signature of the testator and of one of the attesting witness. I did not see the Raja signing, and when I signed, the Raja was not around. So now this breaches the most important criteria of a will, was that attesting witnesses must sign in time, the testator must sign in presence of attesting witness, and attesting witnesses must sign in presence of testator. Therefore, in this case, that will was disbelieved by the court. Now, when we are talking of a witness, it is not just the attesting intention of the testator must be known. It is necessary that the intention of the witnesses should also be to sign the will. What is called in Latin is animo attestendi, which means they must sign with an intention to execute the will. Anyone who signs a will without the intention of being an attesting witness will not be considered to be an attesting witness. You would see in your career that a will would contain many signatures. It may contain a signature of a scribe. It definitely contains the signature of a sub-registrar, the registrar who registers the will. It may contain the signature of identifying witness, or it may contain the signature of certain people whom the testator wants them to sign, which could be like in a matter where a father did not want any controversy of his death. So he said, all my children would sign the will. So all of them signed in confirmation of the will, but none of them was an attesting witness. So they must sign with an intention of attesting a will. That's a second criteria which is necessary to be fulfilled in case of attesting witness. Third is, who could be an attesting witness? The normal rule is anyone the testator wants could be an attesting witness. The courts also say usually one would get someone who is known to you to be an attesting witness. But there is no bar that a stranger cannot act as an attesting witness. As a piece of advice, whenever you get to practice is, the attesting witness should be chosen to be one who are younger than testator, because the will is proved through the attesting witness, and they should be people who are likely to outlive the testator. So therefore the witnesses should be younger than the testator. They may be strangers, but it is preferable that they must be known to the testator. The choice of a testator in certain occasions have been a point of debate and controversy in court. When strangers have signed as an attesting witnesses, the courts have divided, and different results come from court depending upon the facts of case, whether a stranger signing a will is a suspicious circumstance or not. I'll give you another case law on this point, again like a story. The will in this case was of a Raja of Himachal Pradesh, as an old princely ruler of a princely state who had large wealth. The will surfaced many years after his death. The attesting witnesses who were described in the will were, one of them was a small-time tradesman, a shopkeeper, and another was a servant working in that shop. The court was put to decide whether these people, is it suspicious that these people have been chosen to attesting witness. The court returned a finding that looking at the peculiarity and circumstances, it is so evident that the Raja in ordinary course would not have chosen these people as an attesting witness. This assumed importance because the bequest made by the Raja was totally against the wishes of against his family members, and he gave everyone to total strangers. Is the video paused? I see a message, the video is paused. Can I proceed? I'll repeat an example. As Nihit Dalmia says, the example is that the will was of a Raja of Himachal Pradesh. It was a small princely state of Himachal Pradesh. His attesting witnesses were a small-time shopkeeper and the servant working in that particular shop. The Raja, the will when challenged, the ground taken was that these people were absolute stranger, and it is very unlikely that they are the ones who would have attested the will of the testator. The court, looking at the background and circumstances of the case, the status of Raja and the kind of witnesses which were chosen, they said these strangers being the attesting witness is a suspicious circumstance, and therefore rejected the will. But it is not that in every circumstance that a stranger as a attesting witness would be challenged. Let me give you an example. A will was executed by a testator in favor of his sister's daughter, Bhanji. The attesting witness to the will were these friends of her son, as in the beneficiary's son. Beneficiary's sister's daughter. Beneficiary's son was the attesting witness. It was challenged in court that the fact that these people have been chosen to be attesting witness, it raises a suspicion, because these were the people who are not known to the testator, and they have been chosen only because they were acting at the behest of the beneficiary. The court rejected this plea and stated that it is too far-fetched to say that the classmates of the son of the beneficiary being a attesting witness is a suspicious circumstance. They actually went ahead to say that it is a natural will. They would know the executor, the beneficiaries would have known them, and there is nothing suspicious about it. Before we move from the beneficiary part, from the attesting witness part to the next topic, I must point out something very peculiar here. There is no bar that the beneficiaries cannot be attesting witness. I repeat, if you are the one who's to get the benefit of a will, you can also act as an attesting witness. But the catch is, if you are an executing attesting witnesses, will to that extent is void. I'll give you an illustration. A person makes a will by which he has 5 properties. He is an attesting witness who himself gets the benefit of 2 of the 5 properties. The will be considered to be valid and legal only to the extent of those 3 wills, 3 properties. The 2 properties of which the beneficiary was the attesting witness would not be considered to be valid, and they will go by way of intestate succession. So the logic which works is the beneficiary has to be avoided as an attesting witness whenever you get a chance to get a will drafted and filed in court of law. The next point, we are moving to the next part. I once again repeat, am I audible? Just give your thumb impression saying that you are audible, or say so before I move on. No response. Okay, good. Now the next part is the execution of a will. After the execution of will is a proof of will. Will तो आपने execute कर लिया अपने घर में. The will comes to the court several years after the will is executed. It may vary from a month to 15 years. So let's be clear that the proof of will is different than execution of will, but in proof of the will, the same principles have to be followed which are required at the time of execution of will. However, there is a difference. The difference is that execution of will requires 2 witnesses, whereas proof of will requires that only one of them should come and depose in the court. Before I go further on this part, I just want to point out that the proof, when a will comes in proof in court, there could be 3 different circumstances whenever by which a will could be proved. The first circumstance, for which I had briefly mentioned, is where the attesting witnesses are available for deposing before the court. That's the first example. The second circumstance is where the attesting witnesses do not recall or deny the execution of will. That's a circumstance the attesting witnesses are available, but when they come to the court, they say, I do not recall, I do not remember whether I went there or not, or I did not sign it. And the third circumstance is where the attesting witnesses are not available, as in they cannot be traced, or they are dead, or they have moved out of the jurisdiction of the court. So that is the third circumstance. We'll deal with each of them. I started with the first part. I'll quickly take you again through to the first part before we move further. The first part is the will can be proved by an attesting witness. The attesting witness has to, out of the 2 attesting witnesses who executed the will, only one needs to come to the court to depose. All he needs to say is what we talked about at the time of execution of will, is that I saw the testator executing the will in my presence. The catch word is presence. And when I attested the will, the testator saw me executing the will. So what is required? A deposition to that effect, that ocularly we saw each other signing the will. Simple rule. So once this is done, the will can be said to be proved. But now when we come on proof, and whenever you get a chance, there is something which is known as law as a burden of proof. The burden of proof can be divided on 3 kind of persons. One, the burden of proof is on propounder. Propounder is the one who comes to the court to enforce the will. The other could be the objector of the will, one who says कि जी will ठीक नहीं है, it is unfair and not legally executed. And third is what we talk about, the duty of the court. So when in the first situation, when the burden of proof is on the propounder only has to come, the propounder's witness have to come to say that ocular thing which we discussed, that this is what happened, the initial burden is cleared. But if in the pleadings, that is in the objection or in written statement, an objection is taken that the will is not executed, it suffers from suspicious circumstance, it does not have the signature of the testator, and of several other circumstances which we will discuss over a period, over next few minutes. Then in that circumstance, the burden, the additional duty upon the propounder is to clear those suspicious circumstances. It is necessary that they must clear those circumstances. Once they clear it, then the will can be said to be proved. The next part is when the will, the objections which are taken in the will is that the will has been executed by way of undue influence, coercion, or fraud. As in, I would say that the objector comes and writes in their written statement that there is a fraud, there is an undue influence or coercion exercised upon the testator in getting the will executed. The burden of proof is on the objectors. They will have to prove that if something of this kind had happened, then they will need to prove the same. I'll tell you the reason why it is necessary is, in law you cannot prove it in negative. I can't prove in court as a propounder, I can't prove in court that I did not exercise the will through coercion or I did not exercise any undue will. Evidence is always positive. Negative part, one who alleges, they say there are 101 of evidence act, it says one who alleges must prove it. So this is what the law on this is. Now it comes the duty of the court. Now the parties have laid their evidence, the pleading is over. The duty is upon the court now. The court has to sit. There is which is known in law as a doctrine of armchair principle. Recorded, it says armchair principle, which means the court has to slip in the armchair of the testator at the time of deciding whether this was the intention of the testator in writing the will which he did. The test is not of a reasonable man. Please understand the difference. A reasonable man may perhaps give a property in a particular manner. I may feel that this is unfair distribution of property. If I am a judge, I would say unfair distribution. But it is not my understanding. It is the understanding of the testator which has to be judged by the court. And it is the duty of the court to slip in the armchair and think like that person, and then only the court's burden, court's duty is discharged and clarified. So now when we have spoken about the duty of the court and burden of proof, now let me quickly discuss what are suspicious circumstances. A will can be considered to be suspicious if there are certain circumstances which give a kind of inkling that all is not clean, dal mein kuch kala hai types, that there is some issue. So you point it out in your pleadings, and the court, and it is the duty of the propounder, as I discussed earlier, to clear the same. Right? Now, let me give you, there are several such cases where a will is said to be suffering from suspicious circumstance. I have picked up the top 5 which are mostly used. The first is, the will is unnatural. Or in almost like I would say 40% of cases where the legal heirs have been disinherited, they take a plea that will is unnatural. What is meant by an unnatural will? An unnatural will means where the people in line of succession are disinherited, or some are chosen and others are not chosen. Let me give an example. A testator makes a will. He says, I give it to my daughter, and excludes the son. Well, it doesn't very often happen in this country. Let us take an example where they give the property to their sons and exclude the daughter. The daughter may come and say it is an unnatural circumstance. So this is what is an unnatural circumstance. Now the question is, does it mean that every time there is an unnatural disposition in the will, can it be said that will is suffering from suspicious circumstance and it needs to be thrown out or disbelieved? The answer is no. It will depend upon facts and circumstances of each case. Let me give you an example where the will was not considered suspicious. I'll give you 4 examples. 2 where it was not considered suspicious, and 1 where where it was considered suspicious. I think we are running short of time, but I'll quickly, instead of 4, I'll give you maybe 2. The first illustration is of not suspicious, where the will says the testator had 3 sons. One lived with him, one lived out of Delhi, and the third lived in Delhi but did not live with testator. Testator made a will whereby he gave the entire of his estate to the son with whom he lived. The court said this is nothing unnatural. Acha, before we move on illustration, let me tell the law on this part is the law is pre 1995. This used to be divided opinion whether it is suspicious or not. In 1995, Supreme Court very categorically held that there is nothing suspicious about it. The reason being, the wills are meant to disturb the normal line of succession. So if they are there to disturb the normal line of succession, how can it be suspicious? Let me give you an illustration where the will was considered to be suspicious. The will was made by an erstwhile ruler of Rewa. He, at the time of making of a will, was a member of parliament and had an access to almost all the top lawyers of the country. However, when the will which was set up by him was drafted by a relatively very, very unknown lawyer based out in Bhopal, and the bequest was of such a kind that the property was given to a trust, the family members were excluded out of trust and other bequest. Looking at the circumstances, the court held that look, this cannot be, this is considered to be, this is unnatural and it is suspicious, and it was disbelieved. The second of example of a suspicious nature is the will is not drafted in the language known to the testator, or where the testator is illiterate, the will has not been read over to him. You recall we discussed that there has to be intention of the testator, must be evident. So intention would be available when the testator knows what it is. If you know Hindi and will is written in English, you will not know about the testator. Or alternatively, where the will person is illiterate, the will is not read over to him, the will cannot be considered to be testator, cannot be said to be free from suspicious circumstance. I'll give you an example where a will was written in Hindi, as in Devanagari script. Evidence showed the testator knew Urdu and English. No evidence was led to the fact that the testator knew Hindi. They could have led evidence to show ji ye signature Hindi mein hai or something of that kind, but which was not proved before the court. The court held that this is not suspicious, right? And they said this is suspicious because no evidence has been led that it was proved that the will is they knew Hindi. The next almost a similar situation is the testatrix in this case was an illiterate woman. The will was written in Urdu, but in writing in Urdu they use the language which is common Hindi words. जैसे हम आमतौर से हिंदी के लफ्ज़ यूज़ करते हैं, but script was used as Urdu. Evidence was led that it was read over to the testatrix. In that circumstance, the court held that evidence has been led that she knew Hindi, the will was read over to her, she could understand Hindi, and therefore it was held that this is not suspicious. Third, commonly employed suspicious circumstances, incorrect recitals in will. If the will describes certain circumstances which are proved to be factually incorrect, whether this could be considered to be suspicious circumstance or not is a question which to be determined by the court. The courts again have a divided view. Gave a divided view that yes, it will depend on facts and circumstances of case whether incorrect recital is valid, is a good enough reason for will to be declared a suspicious circumstance or not. I'll give you one illustration here only because we are running short of time. The will was set up by the sister of the testator saying that I am the beneficiary, by which he gave the entire property to me, whereby he gave the entire property to me, and since he was happy with my services offered. The testator had a daughter who was disinherited. The witnesses came and deposed in line in which they ought to be deposed कि हमारे सामने हुआ and things like that. But on a closer scrutiny, court looked at the will The will had described the daughter of a testator as by the name Balwant Kaur, whereas her name was Amrit Kaur. The question before the court was, can it be considered suspicious? Court realized that there was no evidence led to show that Balwant Kaur and Amrit Kaur are one and the same persons. Right? The court said, well, this is suspicious. That a person would not describe a will, would not describe a wrong name of the daughter in a will. So this is suspicious. Another illustration, and quickly go through this, is where the will had stated that the testatrix had stated in her will that my son had predeceased. Evidence showed that he was alive at that time. The court held it is impossible for a mother to write in will that his son is no more when he was alive. It was considered to be suspicious. Fourth is where we talk about a disputed signature of the testator. His signature is disputed and these are not the signatures of the testator or testatrix, so therefore it is suspicious. I'll give you one illustration, though I had two, but again I'm running short of time. In a case, a will which was a holographic will, I'll tell you, holographic wills are those wills which are made written in hand by the testator, totally written in hand, and which are graded as the highest validity kind of a wills. In this particular will, the testator was 95 years of age, and in his will which he wrote over a period of 3 months, the signatures varied, his writing varied from one page to another, and it was found shaky in some place and it was of different kind in another place. It was debated that, well, this is a shaky signature and the signatures do not match, therefore this will should be declared to be suspicious circumstance. The court held that age is such a criteria. The person is 95 years of age. This shaky signature is bound to happen, and when the will is written over a period of 3 months, then the signature may vary at this age and there is nothing suspicious. That takes me to the last illustration, suspicious circumstances, where it is stated that the beneficiary has participated in execution of the will. Let me tell you does this mean. The beneficiary, the person who is to get the benefit in the will, plays a predominant role in existence of a will. He engages the lawyer, he takes you to the registrar's office, he does everything. He does everything about the will. Can this be considered to be suspicious? The views of court are that in case the mere presence of a beneficiary or executor of a will at the time of execution may not raise a doubt per se, but where the beneficiaries, it is evident from the evidence that the beneficiaries dominated the psyche as well as the wish and will of the testator, it is certainly suspicious. That takes me to the last example, and I'll close with that and I'll ask you for questions. A will was prepared, a will was executed by a testator in a town where his married daughter lived. The testator had 3 sons besides the daughter. He makes a will at a place different than where he was normally resident. He gives the entire property in favor of his daughter and her son. The will got drafted by the daughter through an advocate. The attesting witness was her husband. The court, looking at the circumstances, held that this is a suspicious circumstance and we will not consider it as a valid and legal will. We will be blocking, we will be saving the session for a while and rejoining in 2 minutes. Just bear with us so that I can take your questions thereafter. As I told you, I am technically challenged. Somebody would be helping me with this.